Hello again. Today I would like to help you figure out which particular components you should be configuring your Mac Pro with. As you already know, the choice of CPU, memory, storage, and GPU, while simple on their website, can lead to some astronomical prices in the end. For this reason, and more importantly, for the reason of getting the system that performs exactly to your needs, choosing the right component is crucial. Every use case scenario is different, and a 24-core processor may actually perform slower than a 12-core processor in some use case scenarios, depending on your workloads. Having as much RAM as you can possibly afford in the system will never hurt it. However, choosing the right amount ideal for your use will help you save money on memory and maybe spend it somewhere else where it matters more. Choosing the right GPU is also important, especially when the very first option you can choose is $2,800. And when it comes to SSD storage, I would like to help you identify how much you need and if you should be buying it directly from Apple as a base config of the system, or would you be better off getting your storage elsewhere. If any of these seem to be the questions you're asking yourself right now, stick around through this video and you may actually get the answers. The very first component you need to decide on is the CPU. If you already know that you're going to be needing more than 768 gigabytes of RAM in your machine, your options are limited to the 24 or 28 core chips, which are $6,000 and $7,000 respectively. Choosing between the two in this case should be somewhat simple for you. Your workload is already memory bound, so either of these will most likely work just fine. If your application is highly multi-threaded, get the 28-core chip. If not so much, then pick the higher single-core frequency 24-core CPU instead. At this price point, you probably won't benefit from buying the CPU from a third party, at least for a while, as Apple prices are quite in line with the MSRP from Intel. 24-core has an MSRP of $63.53, and the 28-core chip has an MSRP of $74.53. So Apple charging 6K and 7K respectively is acceptable even if these are actually upgrades to the base config. The second scenario where 24 and 28 core CPUs make sense would be if your workload is highly multi-threaded. We're talking running applications which utilize most of your CPU cores 4 to 6 hours a day, or potentially all the time. Tasks like rendering, video transcoding, machine learning, virtualization, looking for aliens, whatever it may be. If this is not the case, stay away from 24 and 28 core chips. 12 and 16 core CPUs are much quicker for most day-to-day tasks and cheaper as well. Now that we have the big boys out of the picture, let's jump back and talk about the entry-level 8-core chip before we jump into talking about 12 and 16 core ones. If you're picking this CPU only for cost savings reasons or with the idea of upgrading later down the line, please consider an iMac Pro with the CPU you actually want, or maybe even a 16-inch MacBook Pro with an 8-core i9 processor. Mac Pro is meant to be a workstation, not a high-end desktop PC, though it can act as one. So there are very few scenarios where an 8-core chip makes any sense, even in the highly single-threaded workloads, where your application cannot actually benefit from multiple cores. The two options that follow it, the 12 and 16 core CPUs, will most likely outperform this chip even in single-core performance due to much higher turbo boost frequencies of 4.4 GHz versus a maximum of 4 GHz turbo frequency you get with the 8-core chip. Now, the perfect choice in my opinion are either the 12-core or the 16-core CPUs. Both of these are very good options for most use case scenarios. For content creators and prosumers, if all you do is work in a single application most of the time, 12 cores should suffice. If you're known to multitask between a few pro apps at the same time, edit while transcoding, etc., 16-core option will probably be much better. These two CPUs are also very fairly priced by Apple. At $1,000 price, you're getting a $1,398 chip, and for $2,000, you're getting a $2,000 chip. So this is a completely acceptable pricing once again. So in summary, the 8-core CPU should not even be a consideration for a Mac Pro in most use case scenarios. The 24 and 28 core processors have specific use case scenarios and are great if your applications constantly utilize all cores for hours on end, or if your system requires more than 768 gigabytes of RAM. However, the 12-core and 16-core chips are the absolute sweet spot in my opinion, and if another $1,000 does not break the bank, pick the 16-core over 12. I personally went with a 16-core CPU myself and couldn't be happier. If I didn't lose you by now and you're still here, let's continue on to the RAM options. Do not, and I repeat, do not purchase anything above the base 32 gigabytes of RAM from Apple directly. Unlike the case with CPUs, RAM pricing through Apple is a complete ripoff. Purchase the RAM for a Mac Pro elsewhere. There are a few links in the video description below, and save as much as $12,000 on the overall configuration. Upgrading RAM in a Mac Pro is easier than probably in any other computer, and you can see for yourself in my previous video. We already loosely touched on memory earlier when we were talking about the CPUs. If you know how much RAM your applications need, pick the right option and forge bravely ahead onto choosing an SSD. If you know absolutely nothing about RAM or how much your applications need, run for a while with your base 32 gigs and get a feel for it. If you just need a bit more, you can simply buy 2 more sticks of 8 gig RAM from people who will probably start selling their original 8 gig DIMMs of RAM on eBay soon and upgrade to 48 gigs. This should cost you no more than $150 and will provide you with a 6-channel configuration versus the 4-channel base Mac Pro comes with, which will also have an added benefit of a little bit increased performance. If you need more than 48 gigabytes, while you could upgrade to 64 for as little as $300, I would skip this particular configuration, as with 16 gigabyte memory modules, it would run only in the 4-channel mode. For just $200 more, or $530 total, you could upgrade straight to 96 gigs in a 6-channel mode, which just makes much more sense. 96 gigabyte config is my recommended option for most people, especially those who will be pushing their systems a little bit harder, content creators and prosumers. If you get it elsewhere online rather than directly from Apple, you will be saving about $470. Anyone needing more than 96 gigabytes will probably already have an idea as to how much they actually need. My personal sweet spot, for example, is 384 gigabytes, but that is only because I run a lot of virtual machines on my Mac, and they actually occupy 256 gigabytes of that memory themselves. So in summary, if you know exactly how much RAM you need, simply get that amount. However, if you need more than 768 gigs of RAM, don't forget that you need a 24 or a 28 core CPU. Unless you're running something insane on your Mac Pro, I would probably not go over 384 gigabytes. That should be plenty for just about anything you can throw in this machine, and it is also the sweet spot Apple uses for all of their benchmarks as well. For most use cases, 96 gigs of RAM should be the safest option. Alright now, so let's talk about storage. We will skip the GPUs for the moment because when configuring systems I usually go in the order of CPU, RAM, storage, and then other things. So, all of us can figure out how much storage we really need. Simply look at your current computer and you'll know. If you're trying to consolidate some external storage internally, as I was doing with my Mac Pro, you can add that up as well into the final figure. For most people who have more than 1 terabyte, the data is probably located on external drives or storage arrays and could and probably should stay there. If you have more than 1 terabyte internally, then you already know better than I as to what your needs really are and why. So with that said, the $400 upgrade option from 256 to 1 terabyte is really a must. While we may argue Apple should have included this as the base config in the machine, the reality of the situation is that they did not. So unless you absolutely know you do not use storage for anything, I would highly recommend you upgrade to 1 terabyte. If anything, your machine will have a bit higher resale value down the line, and for most people, 1 terabyte should be enough. If, however, you need much more than 1 terabyte, or if you need very fast storage, I would recommend not purchasing this through Apple. Rather, you should buy it as an add-on elsewhere. This is where I made a mistake with my initial configuration. It turned out, while the decision to have 8 terabytes inside my Mac Pro was sound, getting it all from Apple was not in my case. Apple's SSDs max out at 3 gigabytes per second, And while this is considered very fast by 95% of people, for the other 5% like me who constantly slam the SSDs with a ton of IOPS from a multitude of apps, this turned out to be a bottleneck. At $2,800 for the upgrade, or $2,200 over the 1TB option, a somewhat more sensible option would have been an OWC's Excelsior 8TB PCI Express drive, which is just $1,900. Not only does it cost less, but more importantly, it has speeds of up to 6 GB per second, which is double the performance of Apple's own SSD. This is what I ended up purchasing in the end, and why I had to return my Mac Pro just to get it back with the right configuration. So in summary, no matter your use case, at the minimum, do opt out for the 1TB SSD option. The upgrade is fairly priced, even though it should have been included for free. If you need more than 1TB, do check out OWC's Excelsior or even Sonnet M.2 cards, which you can load up with 4 of your own M.2 SSDs. These cost even less than OWC and should offer a max throughput of about 7 GB per second. I would recommend going with Apple's other internal SSD options above 1TB only if you do not need more than 3 GB per second, you do not wish to bother with secondary drives in your system, have all your PCI Express slots in use by other devices, or you simply want to max out the system because you can. And finally, the GPUs. If you're an absolute pro when it comes to graphics, you can lecture others why GDDR5 is better than GDDR6 or HMB, if you know how many shaders you actually need for specific tasks, or ultimately, if your software supports specific pro cards from a pre-approved list. This section is not for you. For everyone else, I would like to offer a little more detail about AMD GPUs that Apple offers so that you can figure out which one you should pick. With all of the current options, you would think that Apple has us all covered. However, this is not the case yet. For most people, prosumers and content creators, the best option will probably be the Radeon Pro W5700X. However, it is not yet available. I will talk about W5700X a little bit later on. However, let's start at the very base config with the Radeon Pro 580X. Specifications-wise, it has 36 compute units, 2304 stream processors, and 8 GB of RAM with a bandwidth of 256 GB per second. This card is not worth more than $400 to $450 in my opinion, and with just 2 HDMI ports and no Thunderbolt controller on board, it really is the lowest end you can possibly get. It will drive 6 of your 4K monitors, up to 2 5K monitors, and surprisingly up to 2 of Apple's new $6,000 6K XDR monitors. However, that's really all it will ever do. It is great for workloads which do not rely much on GPU performance, or for workloads where end user plans on bringing in their own much more affordable or much more powerful GPU option. A benefit for some may be that this particular card is a half-height MPX module, which does not cover the second PCI slot in the system, nor does it use its bandwidth because it does not have a Thunderbolt controller like the other cards do. So in summary, this card is a great choice for you if you are a consumer or a prosumer who does some light content creation, maybe editing 1080p videos, someone who doesn't care about GPU performance and won't miss the extra Thunderbolt ports the other options bring, someone who maybe needs extra PCI slots that this smaller MPX module frees up on your system. Well, if all of these check, then this GPU is for you. One thing I would like to mention is that with this base card, if you connect your Apple XDR displays, the Thunderbolt ports on those displays will run at USB 2.0 speeds, or in other words, they will be slower than anything. The card does not support display stream compression, DSC, and cannot provide full bandwidth to these ports. Same is the case even with the very high-end GPUs from Apple, like the Vega 2 and the Vega 2 Duos. The only card that supports DSC because of its newer Navi architecture is the W5700X. So now that we mention it again, let's talk about it. This option is not yet available at the time of this video. However, W5700X may actually be the best choice for most. I sure believe it is for me. However, I got the Vega 2 instead simply because of wanting more Thunderbolt ports on my system as a whole as soon as possible. We do not know the pricing for W5700X. However, personally, I believe that it will be between $1,200 and $1,600. This being Apple, it may reach as high as $1,800, but I do not believe that it should be more than this. Specifications-wise, this particular GPU has 40 compute units, 2650 stream processors, and 16 gigs of GDDR6 RAM, which runs at 448 gigabytes per second. It supports up to 6 4K displays, 3 5K displays, and up to 3 Apple XDR monitors. More importantly for some is that this card is the only card in Apple's lineup currently which supports display stream compression, or DSC, which means that it will offer full Thunderbolt port speeds on the back of your Apple XDR monitors, as due to this compression of video signal, there is actually enough bandwidth available for other data to pass through. Honestly, for most consumers, prosumers, content creators, this will be a much better and more capable option than the wimpy 580X, and I am guessing, as there is no pricing yet available, it will come at a price much more palatable than the $2,800 Vega 2, which sits above it. While there are no performance metrics yet for this GPU, I am guessing that this card should have about 25 to 35% less performance than Vega 2, which sits above it, but also that much more performance more than the 580X itself. Two of them should be as fast as 1.5 Vega 2s. The third option is the Radeon Pro Vega 2. This is the GPU I actually got, as W5700X was not yet available. It is a very powerful, though a bit pricey GPU at $2,800. With the double of the compute units of a 580X and double the stream processors and 4 times more RAM, it is almost as having two 580X GPUs, plus probably close to an extra 50% in performance gains due to insane HMB memory bandwidth. It also comes with 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports and 1 HDMI 2.0 port. It supports up to 6 4K displays, 3 5K displays, and up to 2 Pro XDR displays from Apple. This GPU also supports Infinity Fabric Link, which allows you to connect 2 of these cards at up to 84 gigabytes per second. This is great for applications that can actually run it hard enough to benefit from this feature. Do remember that this GPU, even at this price, does not support display stream compression, DSC, so your Apple XDR display ports on the back will be as slow as USB 2.0. If you're doing 3D content creation, CAD work, virtual reality, high-end game development, animation, this is a very good GPU to start with. If you do not know what to buy, definitely don't want a 580X, but want a Mac Pro now before W5700X is released, this is the GPU to get. In addition, you will have something that has a better resale value than a 580X when the time comes to replace it. The last option, called Radeon Pro Vega 2 Duo, is the same card as the previous one, however, with 2 of them on one double-height MPX module. So if you double everything I just said about Vega 2 earlier, you will have a Vega 2 Duo. If all the performance you need can fit in 2 Vega 2s, you actually have 2 options in order to get it. The first option is to buy 2 Vega 2 cards, and the second option, which costs the same amount of money, is to buy a single MPX module with 2 Vega 2 cards on it. Which way you decide to go with this is up to you. Personally, I would just get a single card with 2 GPUs and leave more upgrade options in my Mac Pro for other things. And finally, if you really want to max things out, you can actually put 2 of these Vega 2 Duo cards in your Mac Pro for $10,800, making it into probably one of the most powerful GPU workstations, at least in 2019. And lastly, this kind of falls into the GPU territory, is the Apple Afterburner card. If you're a video editor or a content creator and your source media from the camera or a recording device is in ProRes or ProRes RAW format, and you work in Final Cut Pro X, which is the only official app with support for Afterburner card at the moment, though more will come soon, then the Afterburner card may really speed up your workflow, especially if your final content output or the timeline is in a large format like 4K, 4K 10-bit, or 8K. If your source media is not in ProRes or ProRes RAW, this card will do nothing for you. It would be nice if it would speed up creating proxy media or help with the transcoding, however, it does not do any of that yet. Do know that most Mac Pros are quite powerful, and with enough CPU power, you may not need to actually shell out another $2,000 for the Afterburner card. So I hope this guide was useful to you in some way, shape, or form, and that in the end it helps you to order exactly what you need the first time around. If it also helps you save some money, then all the better. Please like and subscribe if you found this helpful. It really means a lot, so thank you for watching and take care.